Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here. 2:15 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, August 20th, 2015. And I've got you looking at Earthquake 3D, which is a USGS feed of the most recent earthquakes. And right now we're looking at under the last 24 hours of earthquakes, 2.5 and greater in the United States and territories, and 4.0 and greater internationally. And what I want to draw your attention to is this new activity that's developed out here in the United States over the past day. We can take it down for the last 2 days, and you'll really see that we've seen a dramatic uptick in activity in the Midwest, extending as far north as Nebraska with a very rare 3.7 earthquake. 3.9 earthquake struck with the fracking operations in South Colorado, North New Mexico, and now we just saw a 2.6 strike at the fracking operations at Fort Stockton, Texas. Of course, the swarm carries on throughout Kansas and Oklahoma at the fracking operations there, and one lone earthquake in Kentucky over here to the east. Now, we're going to go look these up, and I'm going to show you a few of the locations in question. We don't have time to go over every earthquake here. And then we'll go over the West Coast and figure out what's going on here on the West Coast, in the Midwest, what to look out for over the next several days. This is just going to be a forecast for the United States. I intend to do a full international earthquake forecast in 4 days. Since I missed the earthquake update 3 days ago, I'm just going to skip this week altogether, and we'll get into it next week. I'm sure everybody will be able to just get along fine without me. But I just would also like to draw your attention. Cuba hit again by another 3.9 earthquake along the Puerto Rican Trench, right in that area we were warning. Also, South Colorado was the area warned, South Texas was the area warned, and the East Coast going up the North American Craton on the east also warned. All the areas have been hit that were warned, by the way. So let's get the coordinates on this from the USGS. Okay, 38 kilometers west of Trinidad, Colorado. And if you're a longtime viewer, you already know it's there. I'm really doing this for the new viewers or for the people who are just tuning in, who are just finding out that there's an earthquake problem developing off these fracking operations. Each time that we see new unrest in the Pacific, it then puts off new unrest, new earthquakes at the drilling and pumping operations across the Midwest. And I'll prove that to you here. So we're zooming in on the 3.9 that just struck this morning in South Colorado. All right, and here's our location in question. And right down here, literally right at the bottom of the hill, is a pumping operation. We'll let this load so you can see it a little bit better. Of course, this is hidden in on the hillside. When I back this out, you'll be able to see how many there are. Each one of these square pads is a different pumping operation, and it goes on and on for miles. I marked some of them in past earthquakes. You know, here you can see a 2.9 earthquake struck on February 9, 2013. But there you go, right in the middle of a large fracking operation. It goes on and on to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. And it's no shock to see earthquakes develop at these locations because there's additional pressure being added in from the west coast that's pushing the plate to the east. So that's the 3.9 there. South Colorado proved to you now that that's at a fracking operation. Let's pull the 2.6, 28 kilometers west-northwest of Fort Stockton, Texas. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to pull the coordinates from the USGS and go put them in on Google Earth to see what resides at the earthquake epicenter. And I've always said this in my videos, guys. I recommend you do this yourself so that you can start to understand where the earthquakes are happening, why they're happening. You can start to keep track yourself. Once you know where they're occurring and why they're occurring at those locations, then it becomes easier to keep track of in the future. So when we back this out just a little bit, of course, we have previously marked frac wells. Here's the earthquake in question, and maybe a few thousand feet at the most away. Okay, here's one right here. Fresh, clean pad, fresh, clean pond, or not clean, but fresh, new pond. Here's another one to the north. Showed this in my last video because of the last earthquake that struck this location, but there you go. Okay, we have our tanks, we have our wellhead, we have our pond, and that's part of a larger operation that goes on and on and on for miles and miles and miles, just like in Colorado. And there's no doubt, I mean, when I say it goes on for miles, guys, you're probably going to have to watch this in full screen to get a good idea of what I'm talking about here. Each one of these square pads here is a different pumping operation. And you might not believe me, so let's just go ahead and prove that to you. You can just randomly zoom in on any one of them. But we'll just back this out and show it to you. It just goes on and on and on. And is it any wonder that we're seeing earthquakes develop out at these locations when you have this much pumping going on at the location, this much drilling, this much gas extraction, water injection happening over and over again at different wells here. And now they're coming in and refracking. That's a new term they've come out with. Refracking, taking old oil wells, coming in, fracking them again after they've already been fracked. In other words, they've already pumped them full of high-pressure liquids to release gas, and they're going to come in and do it even more. And again, guys, look. Every one of these, on and on, for miles and miles and miles. And earthquakes are developing at these locations. There's no doubt about it, and there's no shock once you understand that the pressure coming from the west is displacing the plate to the east, and the weak spots are the spots where we've drilled or where there's dormant volcanoes. And such is the case on the west coast. Okay, this 2.9, 2.8, Blowout Mountain up in the Pacific Northwest, or at least northwest Nevada. You could call this Pacific Northwest. West Coast for sure, 2.9, 2.8, new swarm, 5,000 earthquakes struck there over the past several months. And again, I've shown that time after time after time in multiple videos. If you're a new viewer, let's just go ahead and show you. Okay, so we'll get the coordinates from the USGS, click on summary, and the reason I click on summary is so that we can also see the margin of error. So they're saying this could be plus or minus 4.8 kilometers from this epicenter, so it's not that accurate, but it's good to look at those stats overall and see what they're saying. So that's why you go to that page as opposed to just pulling the coordinates from the front page. Now let's go, let this zoom in. All right, back to our swarm location again. Here's Bittner Butte. Here's Blowout Mountain. And Blowout Mountain, again, an old blast crater from a long time ago. We have basalt, igneous rock along the edges of this blast zone, and it's part of a greater butte complex that you can make out the edges on still here. Here's Bittner Butte. Another good example showed every time, just so that new viewers can understand that this is volcanic related, that deep down below there's magma chambers that are being displaced by the pressure coming from the west coast overall. So here's our lava flow. Here's the butte edge from the old flow that exists out here, most likely formed undersea or underwater at some point. Bittner Butte top right there. And we have our swarm happening all the way down the ridge, and that's an old fault zone that hasn't moved in a very, very long time. Right across the ridge here, we've got this mountain range. You've got a large volcanic field that extends all the way up to the range with a dome butte down here to the south. Let me zoom in. A round mountain, which is a dome volcano, and then we also have different flows that exist throughout here, and there's no doubt about it. You guys can come check out the volcanic history here. Again, you'll have to watch this full screen to get a better idea of how many craters that are actually out here, but I'm just counting. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I mean, this is just right in that region here. If you go further east, here's another one, Caldwell Butte, 24. Let's zoom in a little bit more so you can see these. East Sand Butte. What are they doing there? Looks like they're mining that out. You can see the old lava rock there. And it goes further to the east. Okay, there's more. And it goes right up to the mountain ridge, which then on the other side, we're having a swarm. And again, this is overall plate pressure causing displacement along the northwest, west coast, and the dormant volcanoes show that movement the most. Geysers, California. Again, we started to see multiple swarms from geysers south to San Francisco and even further south along the west coast. Okay, that also caused by this upwelling pressure, which is displacing the magma chambers on the west coast, displacing the fracking operations here in the Midwest, and displacing the east coast due to pressure transfer. Let's go look up the single earthquake over here in central Kentucky. And again, we don't normally see many Kentucky earthquakes, so it's pretty interesting to see that there is an earthquake developing at that location along the eastern edge of the craton. And we'll go find out what's there. I have no clue what's there personally. Never looked this location up. So this will be a shock to me, whatever's there. And there might be nothing there. It might be the natural pressure transfer earthquake displacing the eastern edge of the craton after all of this activity to the west. Okay, what do we got? Looks like we've got a river, a highway. What do we got? Got some new construction going on there. Let's back this out just a little bit, see if there's anything nearby that stands out as odd. Okay, more new construction. You don't see any frack wells, do you? I mean, really, we don't see any fracking operations, no quarries, no anything to give away any kind of other cause for the earthquake other than it to be a natural pressure transfer earthquake along the East Coast. We always see East Coast, Eastern Craton movement after excessive Midwest and West Coast movement. And over the last, well, just take a look at it. Over the last 7 days, you can see the entire eastern edge of the Craton has moved from the Nissan factory down here to the south, central point right here in Kentucky, northeastern point in Maryland, okay, or New Jersey, I'm sorry. Okay, all three of those earthquakes along the eastern edge of the Craton. You can see now the whole edge of the plate has been moved from the northwest to the south and back up the East Coast. Right in the middle, we've got that lone 3.7 out in the grasslands of Nebraska. Nebraska just started this year doing injection wells. They had a huge debate on it. Of course, they didn't disclose the location that it's being done at, but there was a massive debate online and at local town hall meetings where they were debating whether or not to start doing injection, and they approved it. Got passed right through. Everybody overlooked the earthquake problem, and now what do we start seeing in Nebraska? In the same year they start doing injections, well, we start seeing new earthquakes, of course. So let's go zoom in on the area, see what we've got. 3.7 earthquake here. This looks like a watering hole for animals. A water well for sure. Let's see, we've got another water well there. These are feeding areas. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Nebraska. First of all, it's absolutely beautiful. It really is. Let me just go show you. Let's see if we got a picture here. Dismal Road. Well, that's not too dismal, obviously. It's absolutely beautiful there. But I don't see any fresh pumping operations. But then again, look at the date on the imagery down here. October 6, 2013. So if they did start doing new injection wells at this location, we wouldn't know until they get another flyover of the area. But I can tell you this, already covered the debate in Nebraska over injection wells. It can't be a coincidence, guys. Hardly ever earthquakes in Nebraska, and now we've seen in the past several months, we've seen 2 earthquakes strike this almost exact same location nearby. We had a 3.4, one county to the north on June 18th. Now here we are on August 19th. Okay? So, I mean, obviously 2 months later, same location roughly, so there's something going on here, and I'm willing to bet it's wastewater injection. And that was part of the debate. They're probably doing it there as well. We heard about the one location, but they didn't disclose where. Could be anywhere throughout the state, guys. So, upper 3.0 earthquake striking Nebraska can't be overlooked since they're starting to do that, right? Overall, I would have to tell you guys, have an earthquake plan ready and be prepared just in case. So what do we expect now over the next 7 days, guys? Well, usually, after we see movement on the West Coast, like we did at the start of this week, it displaces the Midwest, which we've seen now over the past several days, and that then displaces the East Coast, which we see here on the map as well. That then resets it normally, and let's look over the last 48 hours to really see. You see there's a silent spot up here to the north and a silent spot to the south. Well, with all of this movement in the Midwest, the West Coast, and along the East Coast, that we're going to start to see new, larger activity up here in the Pacific Northwest again now. This was over the last week. We were watching the West Coast to move, and it did. There weren't any large earthquakes up here in the far Pacific Northwest over the past several weeks. Now we need to watch. Again, why? Well, the pressure is resetting. Over the last 48 hours, the entire North American Craton has moved on at least a 2.5, more like a 3.0 or greater level. Over the last 48 hours, the entire plate has moved, except for the area up here. The pressure coming from up here is pushing the whole area. Well, it's now reached its maximum push point. Now that the East Coast has moved, you can imagine if this was filled with a low to high meter, red being low down here, high being green up here, that this filled all the way up to full. And now that it's full, guess what's going to happen? It's going to reset, and we're going to see a new earthquake kick off new pressure on the West Coast to start a new series of displacement events across the Craton. So again, it reaches its maximum build point all the way across the plate. Of course, pressure transferring from the West Coast to the south and then back to the Northeast. This means we need to watch again. Let's name it down to a small 500-mile stretch so that nobody can say that we're just warning the whole West Coast. we need to watch off the coast of Washington State going south along the axial seamount to the Gorda Escarpment. This pretty much puts the entire state of Oregon under a watch, but it would be offshore. And as we've seen in the past, guys, we've seen 6.5 earthquakes strike off here off the Gorda Escarpment, here off the west coast, and hardly anybody feel it here on the Northern California, Southern Oregon region. That was just last year. And the year before. And the year before that. 6.0 earthquakes have struck here every year for the last 3 to 4 years. People hardly ever notice it. So that could strike. We have to keep on watch for anything from an upper 4 and larger, but I would lead a guess that we're looking at that upper 5, lower 6.0 range earthquake, maybe an upper 5, striking from the Gorda Escarpment north to the axial seamount, possibly as far north as central Washington State. Again, this is a volcanic region, axial seamount erupting, cleft segment having the swarm 2 months ago, and Gorda Escarpment being a volcanic zone. So it's no shock when you see volcanic earthquakes on land that we'll see a larger earthquake at the volcanic regions out to sea. In the Midwest, well, now that you guys have moved, once the West Coast shows new movement, we always have to watch out for larger movement in the Midwest. Well, Colorado, Texas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, all in the last 48 hours, look how much it's moved. This is building towards a larger earthquake in the region. No doubt about it. Over the next 7 days, we should see at least a mid 4.0 earthquake strike at one of these fracking operations. Let's get it down to a small area, but there's several to watch. So southern Colorado, right here at the border, already showed you that location. Southwest Texas, near Fort Stockton. Dallas, Texas, south to Venus, Texas. So it's a pretty long stretch here throughout Texas, and going north through northern Oklahoma, going up into south central Kansas. This whole region is now moved. The entire circle, the entire area has moved on at least a 3.0, more like a 4.0. You know, you got a couple 3.9s in here. Let's just take that up one notch to 4.0, and it lets you know that the whole area is moving. And it will show a larger earthquake over the next 7 days at the pumping operations, and it'll get everybody's attention. It'll put fracking back on the map for a lot of people. It may even cause some damage. Hope I'm wrong. But the swarms that are there are indicative of a possible larger earthquake, again developing out at one of these 4 locations, and you got to include the one that you don't see on the map here, which is North Dallas, Venus, Texas, in this region here. Why? Because the pressure coming from the west coast has now displaced the whole region. We're going to see another superfracture. Superfracture is a term that I've coined to describe the actual process of what happens when we see one large earthquake at a fracking operation, then fracture the well, release its contents underground, causing other fractures nearby at other wells. In other words, we see one well shake to the point where the casement fractures. That causes other casement fractures, releasing other water under high pressure, causing other unexpected earthquakes to develop out at a shallow level above or below sometimes the pumping operation itself. So, guys, what can I say? That's a U.S. earthquake forecast only, and I'm trying to get it down to small areas to watch. Of course, the Midwest is a large area overall, but there are small points inside of here that we need to watch over the next 7 days. The West Coast, pretty small area up here to the northwest, needs to watch. When I said we need to watch to the south, this takes us south of the border. So we get down into Mexico, and that starts going into an earthquake forecast internationally. If an earthquake was to strike to the south, again, this is no shock, but it's going to be along the Gulf of California, Baja, Mexico, northern Mexico, somewhere in this region here. And again, even if it's a larger earthquake, we saw a 6.1 earthquake strike in 2011. Nobody, and I mean nobody, I had people tell me that it didn't happen because they didn't feel it. All right, nobody felt the 6.0 earthquake that struck along the Gulf of California. Maybe some people in Mexico did, but here in the States, didn't get any attention. Nobody cared. And that's happened multiple times. We've seen multiple 5 and 6.0 earthquakes strike right in here over the past few years, guys, and nobody cares. So you only care when it strikes inside the U.S. and you feel it, right? So, again, if we're seeing an earthquake down here to the south, it's going to be in the Gulf of California. No big deal, nothing to worry about. Unless it causes a tsunami, which they just issued a report this past week that Southern California does stand at a risk for a possible tsunami to develop. How about that? All the professionals who said it was impossible, now it's proved it can happen. So that's, again, Southern California, Ventura. Again, that goes up into Los Angeles. Watch those locations for tsunami activity if you see a large earthquake off the shores or down here to the south along the Gulf of California. And when I say a large earthquake, it would have to be above an 8.0 or greater earthquake to cause any kind of noticeable huge wave to come into the location. So, unless you see a large 8.0 or greater earthquake strike off the shores of California or Baja, Mexico, or the west coast of the United States, you don't have to worry about a tsunami. It's just a fact. I mean, you know, there may be some upper 7.0 earthquakes that cause some smaller wave activity, maybe a foot or two. But really, when you break it down, you see bigger swells when there's a lunar tide coming in, okay? Really. So that's not much to worry about tsunami-wise unless it's a very, very large earthquake. And you'll know it. If you get that 8 or 9.0 earthquake that strikes offshore, you'll feel it. You'll know it. You'll know that it's been going on for a minute and a half. It's the longest earthquake you've ever felt. You'll know you need to get to higher ground if that happens. It makes you wonder why in Japan, when the big one hit, did the people not immediately go to higher ground? They were lax in their preparedness over here in Japan when the tsunami struck. Why? Because a 7.2 earthquake struck just 3 days before the big one, and everybody walked around like it was no big deal, even though it sent in a 3-foot wave. So a 3-foot wave came in, everybody just looked at it like, oh, no big deal, we get earthquakes all the time here, nothing to worry about. And 3 days later, another huge earthquake strikes, and what did they do? They responded the same way. Very few people actually evacuated, got out of low-lying areas, followed the plan like they were supposed to, and that's what led to tens of thousands of deaths in North Japan when that all happened. Those big walls of flaming debris heading towards the people as they're finally in their car, driving away 30 minutes after the earthquake struck. So, and I'm not being harsh on those people. They're the prepared ones. The people in Japan are supposedly the ones that are prepared. So, we're trying to prepare you now on the West Coast, just in case. And guys, I can already tell you, unless it's a very, very, very large earthquake, you won't need to be watching out for that big tsunami. You'll need to know what to do inside of a structure, outside of a structure, how to survive with, you know, food, water, transportation, communications for an extended period of time without any help from the outside. You'll need to know how to do that as opposed to survive a wave on the West Coast. Okay? So much love. Be safe. Cheers, guys. Hey guys, 7:17 p.m. now on Thursday, August 20th. Really quick, I'm adding on to the end. I forgot to do the East Coast portion of the forecast. Got sidetracked here on the West Coast talking about that tsunami stuff. But really quick before I get the video out, let's just quickly sum up the East Coast. Of course, we already talked about the craton pressure causing excessive earthquake activity from the West Coast down to the fracking operations. And then what we see is the eastern edge of the plate become displaced. Natural earthquakes develop along the eastern edge of the mountain ranges on either side every time we see activity in the Midwest and West Coast. So, what do you need to watch for over the next 7 days on the East Coast? Now, I know people on the East Coast might not be used to any kind of noteworthy earthquake activity. You do need to watch in the far, far northeast, southeast Quebec, going into Maine, New Brunswick, and as you can see, the New Jersey earthquake on here from this past week. There's also a 2.7 that struck in Maryland as well that's not on the map now, just over 7 days ago. So that just lets you know that the eastern edge of the craton is under pressure, and if you do see an upper 3, lower 4.0 earthquake strike your region, don't be shocked. Just understand that that pressure is transferring across a vast distance due to excessive activity in the Pacific. So over here in the West Pacific is displacing the entire United States, and we're seeing earthquakes translate across the whole plate. So watch out for earthquake activity here. That will then determine your activity on the East Coast. The states that need to be under watch exist along the edge of the plate where the mountain ranges are. So you can see North and South Carolina here, Virginia, where we had the 5.9 earthquake in 2011. I'd like to remind you all that 5.9 was preceded in the same day, just a few hours before, by a large greater than 5.0 earthquake, I think it was a 5.4, that struck the Colorado fracking operations, where this 3.9 is here now, that I showed you earlier in the video. So when we saw a large earthquake here, several hours later, there was a 5.9 here on the East Coast to cause damage on the Washington Monument, caused panic on the East Coast. And so just watch out here in the Midwest, and then that will determine your size to the East Coast, and the areas again to watch are right along the mountain ranges. That takes us up into Jersey, New England, of course New Hampshire, Vermont, and right up into Maine. Of course, we don't see too many earthquakes strike this region, so if there are, they should be smaller, but enough to catch people's attention. This past week, it was reported as sounded like explosions underground, rumbles, booms, and we talked about that in the last earthquake forecast video at length about how there could be new booms, rumbles, that sort of thing. And that's what the earthquake was reported as, the one you're looking at on the map here right now in Jersey. So again, just have an earthquake plan ready and be prepared. I'd like to point out, back in 2011 and 2012, they installed all new seismic monitoring equipment around the city of New York and started to prepare for a larger earthquake to strike in the region there. That was back in 2011 when we were seeing this kind of activity swarm out on the West Coast and the Midwest. Once you start seeing upper 4.0 earthquakes strike the Midwest, it just lets you know to be on watch to the east. Okay, guys? So again, and what you need to watch for, again, be prepared for, is what to do inside of a structure in case of an earthquake. Even when you reach into that 4 to 5.0 range, it will knock things off shelves, knock over large objects. So just know what to do when you're inside of a structure, where you'll go, how you'll deal with that, and how you'll exit your building. That's what you need to know. Food, water, transportation, communications come secondary to survival out of a building. Okay? Cheers, guys.